From the time Jesus was arrested to the time he appeared to them in the house after the resurrection were the most terrifying 60 hours, give or take, in his disciples' lives. Most of them did not even see the crucifixion itself because they were too scared and devastated to be there. Imagine the trauma they were going through of having their teacher arrested and then sentenced to crucifixion. Now imagine the trauma John, his best friend and cousin, Mary, his mother, and Mary the Magdalene, who insisted on caring for him personally, were going through watching all of it unfold. They didn't know in that moment that the resurrection was coming. He had told them, yes, but it's clear that in all the pain this bit of information was forgotten, or disbelieved in the face of bloody wood and nails. It's hard to believe in resurrection when a lifeless, bloodied corpse is staring at you, and you have to remove it from its mounts, embalm it, and get it into the tomb with the sun setting in less than an hour. Thomas was nowhere to be found for days afterwards. He was so devastated. And when he was found and brought home after the resurrection, he couldn't bring himself to believe it. He was too scared to hope, because hope died for him that past Thursday night when his teacher was arrested. Understand the brokenness of the disciples once Jesus was arrested. It's important to not try to sugarcoat or to whitewash what happened on April 3rd, 33 CE. We're so used to seeing depictions of the crucifixion that we're desensitized to it. It was traumatizing for those who loved him, who stood by and watched it unfold. It was a roller coaster from bad to worse, as the back and forth played out between Pilate and the high priests. It literally shook the ground and damaged the largest and most important building in the city. It felt like the world had ended, and nothing else mattered when the news was delivered to those hiding in the house that he had been crucified and that he had died. Where do we go now? What do we do? These were questions that, though appropriate, couldn't even form in their minds. They had been a found family for 3 years and were closer to each other than to their own blood relations. They had given up jobs, family members, property, and their entire former lives, and had little, if anything, left of the world to return to. And the entire reason for this had just died on a cross. Devastated doesn't quite cover it. They had seen him do the impossible. It had been terrifying and awesome to see him walking on the water during a raging storm, in total command of it. They had seen him literally call the dead from the tomb. They had seen him face down a mob of Pharisees armed with stones and turn them all away with just his words. And he was dead. How was he dead? How was that even possible? They knew he wasn't physically strong. They had even worried about it. It was a contradiction to what they had seen him do, but it was the reality they had lived with and accepted. He was dead. The news didn't seem real until his mother, John, Mary the Magdalene, and 2 others had returned from quickly getting him into the tomb. The looks on their faces confirmed their worst possible fears, that it was true. He was dead. And in a way, so were they. Everything they had become had died with him, and there was nothing left for them but to sit and hide and do nothing as Shabbat fell upon them like a heavy stone, sealing them into a tomb as well. Even still, there are a few words or even whole paragraphs which could describe how the disciples were feeling that Sunday evening. They couldn't make up their mind if Mary the Magdalene had snapped or not. Peter, John, his mother, and 1 other besides her had seen the empty tomb. They had brought back the empty grave cloth with a strange ghostly image on it. They had wanted to hope, but so far, Mary had been the only one to have seen him. And to be honest, she had burst into the house looking like she had lost her mind completely when she had told them. Her face and her undone veil were soaked and streaked with tears. Her eyes were wild but animated and so full of joy. No, that's not quite the right word. Excitement, shock, looking as though she could take on the entire Roman legion by herself and didn't care if she shouted it from Mount Zion itself. These are what filled her eyes and her face as her whole body shouted at us, before she did. He's alive. She left almost as quickly to find the others who hadn't returned to the house after his arrest and to tell them. Her whole demeanor and disposition had changed from when she had left that morning. She hadn't cared whether she was caught by the Roman soldiers. She hadn't cared if she had gotten them executed with her plan. She hadn't cared if she herself died, because in a way she had already had died when he did. It was not the same woman who went out with the proper embalming spices that Sunday morning who returned. This woman would have shouted that she had seen the teacher alive in the face of the high priest, the prefect, and even Caesar himself. The whole household of disciples was disturbed and unmoored since she had come in. They remembered what he had said, that he would rise after he was murdered, but they were too scared to hope. They hadn't seen him themselves. It was just too painful, and they didn't want to be given that hope only to have it ripped away from them again. Yet there was his empty burial shroud, fighting to do just that. There was Mary the Magdalene screaming at them, literally. And then there he was, just as they were hearing from Cleopas about how the two of them had just walked and talked with him for miles. They had left early that morning for Cleopas's house in Emmaus Nicopolis, easily a half day's journey on foot from Jerusalem. The rest of the disciples hadn't expected to see them again that day. They had to have set out to return to Jerusalem less than an hour after arriving in Emmaus. They too had that same animated, excited, awestruck look in their eyes that they had seen in Mary's. And then, "Epistata, teacher!" Someone screamed in her native Greek, even as they were debating, arguing past their fear of hope. And then all eyes turned to see what she was seeing, what her eyes in shock were registering, and she didn't know or even care that she was holding her breath. She couldn't speak another word. She was frozen where she was. She couldn't even blink, as that same easy smile and eyes, the color of the sea, returned her gaze lovingly as only he could. "Shalama alachun," he greeted them in his native Syriac. His hands up in a gentle gesture meant to calm them all down. Time just seemed to stop. There was no sensing it in that moment. There was no sensing anything else, as some, like her, remained frozen to where they stood. Others rushed towards him. Kepha, or Peter, had been one of those latter. John had been one of the former, tears streaming down his face as he saw his best friend since childhood, whom he had watched bleed out and die 2 days before, and whom he had helped place on a cold stone slab in a tomb, standing whole and alive in front of him. "Shalama alachun, my brothers," he repeated himself in Syriac. "It's me, don't be afraid." And it was. From the absolute kindness and love in his eyes to the good-humored smile on his lips, from his chestnut-colored hair to his still somewhat thin frame. The marks from his torture and execution were still there on his head and in the wrists of his outstretched hands. She hadn't seen it, but she had been told by those who had what had transpired. Here he was, Yeshua, her teacher, who meant everything to her, was alive right in front of her. His apostles, his other disciples, their children, and his own mother. "Bari?" she asked, as her hands clapped to her mouth and the sobbing began. She too had watched him die, and had helped bury him. She couldn't say any more. "Yes, Emmy, it's me." Slowly and then quickly, she rushed toward her son and gripped him so fiercely one might have thought he would break. But there was a strength to him now, an energy surrounding him that she doubted anything in the skies or on the ground or under it could break. It was an energy that had defeated Hades himself and led him as a prisoner of war in triumph. It was an energy even the Olympian gods couldn't overpower or defeat. They were powerless to the being who now stood among them, trying to calm them all down in the face of something that shook heaven and earth. Yeshua had risen from the dead. The teacher was alive. There are no real words to describe what was felt, and those feelings wouldn't be forgotten into the ages of ages. How does a soul forget this? The teacher is alive.